I never thought a single decision could change the course of my entire life, but looking back, that's exactly what happened. It all started on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where nothing seems special until, suddenly, everything is. I was walking home from work, my mind occupied with the usual thoughts, emails I had to send, bills that needed paying, and the ever-growing list of things I never seemed to have time for. That's when I saw it, a small, weathered notebook lying on a park bench. The pages were slightly curled from the wind, the cover cracked and well-worn. Something about it made me stop in my tracks. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone rushing back to claim it. But the park was nearly empty, just an old man feeding pigeons and a couple jogging in the distance. I hesitated, then sat down, picking up the notebook with a mix of curiosity and guilt. Maybe it belonged to a student, or someone who had been sketching or writing poetry. I told myself I'd just take a quick peek to see if there was a name inside. Flipping open the cover, I was met with neat handwriting, the kind that's both elegant and precise. The first few pages were filled with what looked like journal entries, but they weren't like any I'd read before. These weren't personal reflections or mundane recounts of the day. They were detailed accounts of events that hadn't happened yet. At first, I thought it was some kind of fiction, a creative writing exercise, perhaps. But as I skimmed through the entries, a chill ran down my spine. The dates listed were all in the near future, and the descriptions were eerily specific. A minor car accident on Oak Street at 3:15 p.m. A sudden power outage across half the city at 8:42 p.m. A lost dog found near the library steps the following morning. They were so precise that they couldn't just be random predictions. I snapped the notebook shut, my heart hammering. This had to be a joke. A prank. Some elaborate game someone was playing. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was holding something extraordinary in my hands. That evening, I couldn't think about anything else. I reread the entries, my mind racing. What if, just for the sake of curiosity, I checked one of the predictions? The first event was only a few hours away, the car accident on Oak Street. I told myself it was ridiculous, but by 3:10 p.m., I found myself walking toward the intersection. At exactly 3:15 p.m., a blue sedan ran a red light and clipped the back of a delivery truck. The sound of screeching tires and shattering glass filled the air. I stood frozen, watching as bystanders rushed to help. No one was seriously hurt, but the scene unfolded just as the notebook had described. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever this was, it was real. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I followed the notebook's entries like a roadmap, watching as event after event unfolded exactly as written. A part of me was terrified, but another part was exhilarated. I had stumbled upon something incredible. But then, I reached a page that made my blood run cold. It was my name. My name and a date, 3 days from now. The entry was short, but it was enough to send my mind spiraling. March 15, 10:27 p.m., he disappears. No one sees him again. I read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. Disappears? What did that mean? Would I be kidnapped? Would I run away? Would something worse happen? I had no answers, only a growing sense of dread. For the first time, I wondered if I should have left the notebook where I found it. I tried to change my routine, to avoid anything that might lead to whatever disappearance was coming. But the more I tried to escape it, the more it felt inevitable. The final night arrived, and at exactly 10:27 p.m., my apartment door swung open without warning. A gust of wind rushed in, carrying the scent of something ancient, something I couldn't describe. And then, darkness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up somewhere unfamiliar, the notebook still clutched in my hands. The pages had changed. The entries were gone, replaced by a single sentence scrawled across the first page. Welcome to the beginning. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and something else, something metallic, like rusted iron. My fingers were still curled around the notebook, my knuckles white from the grip. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Where was I? The last thing I remembered was the door of my apartment swinging open, the rush of wind, and then darkness. Now, I found myself in an unfamiliar place. A dim, flickering light illuminated the space around me, casting long, jagged shadows against damp stone walls. The floor beneath me was rough, uneven, like the inside of a cavern. I turned the notebook over in my hands, my pulse pounding. The scrawled words, "Welcome to the beginning," burned in my mind. The pages had changed, but how? And why? I hesitated before flipping to the next page, my breath catching as more words appeared before my eyes, forming right as I looked at the paper. Turn around. A chill ran down my spine. My body tensed, every instinct screaming at me not to obey, but something, curiosity? Fear, forced me to move. I turned slowly, my heart hammering. A figure stood a few feet away, just at the edge of the dim light. At first, I thought it was a statue, tall, unnaturally still, its face obscured by a deep hood. But then it moved. Finally, the figure said, its voice smooth yet weighty, like a whisper that carried too much meaning. "You've arrived." I swallowed hard. "Where am I?" The figure took a step forward, and for the first time, I could see what lay beneath the hood. It was a face, but not a normal one. The features seemed to shift subtly, like a reflection in disturbed water. A face that was both familiar and foreign, as if I had seen it in a dream I couldn't remember. "You're where you were always meant to be," the figure said cryptically. "The notebook chose you for a reason." I glanced down at the pages again, hoping for an answer. More words appeared, as if responding to my unspoken question. "Follow him." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to trust this stranger, but at this point, what choice did I have? I followed as he turned and walked deeper into the cavern, the light fading until we were enveloped in near darkness. The air grew colder, and I could hear the distant sound of something dripping water. Footsteps? Breathing, echoing through the tunnel. "You've been reading the notebook," the figure said as we walked. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted. "But I don't understand it." "It predicted events. It predicted me. And yet, you never stopped to ask who wrote it." I frowned. That thought had crossed my mind, but in my rush to unravel its mysteries, I had never considered the most important question: who had created the notebook? And why had I found it? I stopped walking. Who wrote it? The figure turned slightly, the shifting face unreadable. A better question is, who is still writing it? A jolt of fear shot through me. "You mean, it's still being written?" The figure nodded. "Even now, as we speak." I looked down at the notebook again, my fingers trembling as I flipped to a blank page. The ink was forming before my eyes. "He doesn't tell you everything. Don't trust him." I snapped the book shut and took a step back. My mind was spinning. If the notebook was warning me, then who or what was I really following? The figure stopped, as if sensing my hesitation. "You're beginning to understand," he said, almost amused. "Good. You'll need that." The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with bookshelves stretching up into the darkness above. Thousands of notebooks, identical to mine, filled the shelves. A massive stone table sat in the center, and on it, an open book was being written in by an unseen hand. The figure gestured to it. "This is where the future is recorded." I approached cautiously. The words forming on the pages were eerily familiar. They described me, in this moment, reaching out to touch the book. I hesitated, then turned the page. My heart stopped. The next entry read, "He makes the wrong choice." I staggered back. What does this mean? The figure didn't answer. Instead, he simply watched as I struggled to make sense of it all. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse, as if the very air was alive, waiting for me to act. And then, before I could stop myself, I did something I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to take back. I grabbed the book from the table and tore out the page. The moment the paper ripped, the chamber shuddered. The air itself seemed to fracture, like a mirror cracking in slow motion. The figure flinched, a reaction I hadn't expected. "You don't know what you've just done," he said, his voice no longer calm. It was something else now. Something almost afraid. The notebook in my hands began to burn, the edges curling with blue flames that gave off no heat. I tried to drop it, but it clung to my fingers, the fire consuming the pages until there was nothing left but darkness. And then, the world shattered. I woke up again, gasping, my hands grasping at nothing. I was back in my apartment. My door was shut. Everything was as it had been except for one thing. The notebook was gone. But on my desk, where it had once been, there was something else. A single sheet of paper, perfectly crisp, with only one line written on it. "You changed everything." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. The weight of those 3 words, "you changed everything," pressed against my chest like an unseen force. I had altered something fundamental, something that was never meant to be changed. But what? And how far did the consequences reach? I barely had time to think before a knock echoed through my apartment. Not a polite, hesitant knock. A deliberate, forceful one. My heart lurched. I had just woken up in what should have been my normal world, but something told me that normal no longer existed. Cautiously, I approached the door. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice unsteady. Silence. Another knock, harder this time. My mind screamed at me to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't home. But then I saw it, movement beneath the door. A shadow shifting. Whoever was outside wasn't standing still. They were waiting. Watching. Swallowing hard, I backed away. My gaze darted to the window. Could I climb down? Run? But before I could decide, the door handle began to turn. I hadn't locked it. It swung open slowly, revealing nothing. The hallway outside was empty. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. My apartment looked the same, but something was off. The air was thicker, the colors muted, as if reality itself was slightly distorted. I turned back inside and nearly screamed. The notebook was back. It sat on my desk, pristine, as if it had never burned. But there was something different about it. The cover, once worn and cracked, was now smooth, its leather darker, almost pulsing. And on the first page, new words had appeared. Run. I didn't have time to process it before a flickering light caught my attention. The reflection in the window, it wasn't mine. I turned sharply, and for the briefest moment, I saw something in the glass. A face. Shifting, like the figure in the underground chamber. Then the light bulbs in my apartment exploded. Darkness swallowed me whole, and in that suffocating silence, I felt something move. Not heard, felt. A presence, deep and knowing, pressing against the very fabric of the room. And then, a voice. Not spoken, but inside my head. "You weren't supposed to change it." I gasped, scrambling backward until my back hit the wall. The notebook lay open on the desk, pages flipping violently as if caught in an unseen storm. My mind screamed at me to wake up, to escape whatever nightmare I had stepped into, but I knew this was real. And then, the pages stopped. A single sentence stood out on the new page. "They are coming." A sharp knock rattled the door again, but this time, the handle didn't turn. Instead, the knock became a pounding. Something or someone was trying to break in. Without thinking, I grabbed the notebook and bolted for the fire escape. As I swung a leg over the railing, a deafening crash filled the apartment. The door had been shattered open. I didn't look back. I climbed down as fast as I could, nearly slipping on the last rung before hitting the pavement. The city stretched before me, eerily quiet for this time of night. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to put as much distance between me and whatever had just entered my home. As I turned a corner, I heard it. Footsteps. But not the kind that belonged to a normal person. They were synchronized, heavy, as if marching in perfect unison. And there were more than one. I ducked into an alley, pressing my back against the cold brick. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. My breathing was shallow, my heart slamming against my ribs. A voice, calm, almost amused, spoke from the shadows. "You can't outrun what's already written." I turned sharply, but saw nothing. Only the darkness of the alley. But the notebook in my hands buzzed with energy. Slowly, I flipped it open. New words were forming again. Follow the stranger. Trust no one else. My breath caught. A stranger? Who? Where? And then, as if summoned, someone stepped into view. A man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the dim streetlight. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice low. "Come with me." I hesitated. My instincts screamed at me to run the other way. But the notebook had never been wrong. Slowly, I nodded and followed him into the night. As we walked through the empty streets, I stole glances at my mysterious companion. His posture was rigid, his movements precise. He led me down alleyways and through abandoned buildings, avoiding the main roads. Whoever he was, he knew we were being followed. Finally, we stopped in front of an old bookstore, its windows covered in dust. He pushed open the door, motioning for me to enter. Inside, the air smelled of aged paper and ink. The place was dimly lit, but the shelves were packed with books, not just ordinary books. Notebooks. Hundreds of them. "This place," I whispered. "This is where it all started," the stranger said. "And where we might find a way to fix what you've done." I turned to him. "Who are you?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat, pulling out something familiar. My stomach twisted. It was a notebook. Identical to mine. "I was like you," he said. "Once." I swallowed hard. "What happened?" His eyes darkened. "I made the wrong choice." Dread curled in my gut. "And?" He exhaled sharply. "And I lost everything." Silence settled between us. Then he handed me the notebook. "Your story isn't finished yet," he said. "But if you don't make the right choices, it will be." I looked down at the book in my hands, feeling the weight of his words. And then, as if on cue, the pages flipped on their own. A new entry appeared before my eyes. "Tomorrow at midnight, the choice will be made. One will stay. One will disappear." My blood turned to ice. I looked up at the stranger, searching his face for answers. But I already knew what he was going to say. "It's you or me," he murmured. "One of us doesn't make it." The room seemed to shrink around me, the air thick with something I couldn't name. And in that moment, I realized. The notebook wasn't just predicting the future. It was forcing it.